The second chapter in our series on Biblical Theology, the creation and the fall of man. The opening words of the book of Genesis, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, are like a superscript, are like a title. Actually, it should read, the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth. However you translate it, the words declare the theocentric character of the creation account. The creative work that brought the cosmos into being is ascribed to God alone. It's noteworthy that the author always places God as the subject of the verb create. The work of creation is distinctly a work of God. In the 2 chapters on the creation, the author concentrated on what God did. There are fully 50 instances in these 2 chapters where God is the subject of verbs, showing what he did in the way of creation. So, God created, God said, God called, the Lord God made, God saw, he rested, he hallowed, he formed, he planted, he commanded, he called, and many things more. In a very real way, the God of Genesis 1 and 2 is the God who acts. Now we learn a couple of things about God from these opening chapters of the Bible. God, for instance, is the only uncreated being. His oneness is self-evident. There is no rival God. Therefore, God is absolutely Lord and sovereign. Secondly, there is a radical distinction between God and his creation. The created universe is not an emanation from God. He transcends his creation. Moses, in the first of his closing messages to Israel in Deuteronomy 32 to 36, raised some pertinent questions with regard to the day that God created man upon the earth. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of a fire? And has any God attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, and by great terrors? The obvious answer to these questions is, to you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God, there is no other beside him. There is the affirmation of the oneness of God and of his singular action within history. The creation story is nothing but the first instance of God's acting in his own creation. Also, we find the work of creation referred to poetically, let's say in the Psalms. When I look at thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars, which thou hast established, Psalm 8, verse 3. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork, Psalm 19, verse 1. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all their host by the breath of his mouth. He gathered the waters of the sea as in a bottle. He put the deep in storehouses, Psalm 33. Then you can take a look at Psalm 89 and Psalm 136. This reference to God as the Creator is happening in Scripture often when the power of God is at stake. When King Hezekiah was, Yechezkiah was confronted with Sennacherib's defiance and threat, he appealed to God, according to Isaiah 37, verse 13 to 16. So take a moment to look it up and read those verses. But he appealed to God, enthroned above the cherubim. Those are the angels surrounding the throne and expressing God's power. The one who as God alone hast made heaven and earth, hast made heaven and earth. So again, this reference to creation. In the prophet's message of comfort to the people of God, he describes God's might and power in this cosmic operation of creation. God can be likened to no one. He created the heavens. The highest reach of the prophet's eloquence found expression in these words: "The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth." And by reason of the power manifested in creation, he can say, "They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." So, that covers the idea of the importance of creation. Let's turn now to the act of creation itself. The definitive word used to describe God's act of creation in Genesis 1 and 2, obviously, is the Hebrew word bara. This word possesses a whole range of meanings. It is used with reference to bringing all things into existence, for example, the heaven, the earth, man, both male and female, the great sea monsters, every winged bird, etc. Its meaning is heightened by the fact that in all instances the word is used with reference to the origin of the world. God is its subject, and only God. From this we gather that the kind of activity expressed by bara is deity work. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Bible, translated the word bara with kitso. Let me check that. Ketitzo, of course. I thought there was something wrong in my notes. Ketitzo, to create. And that is the nearest equivalent in the Greek language. The word bara is read and understood as a parallel with asa, to make, and yatsar, to form, and with kun, to establish. Thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it, he established it. There you have everything together in the text of Isaiah 45, verse 18. 4 different words. For thus says the Lord who created, bara, the heavens, who formed, yatsar, the earth, and made, asa, it, he established, kun, it. He did not create, bara, it, a chaos. He formed, yatsar, it to be inhabited. So, the word bara, to create, is similar in meaning to the words formed, made, and established. Those are three elements that belong to the semantic group, the group of words that have a common family of meanings. And so we can say to create means to form, to make, to establish. Now, the meaning of creation. Prefacing every creative act in the Genesis 1 account, the words God said, Vayomer Ad Hashem Yehi Or, and God spoke and said, let there be light, and similar expressions, they carry a very significant meaning. They suggest that this act of creation is a free and spontaneous action. God was not involved in a strenuous act of labor, which would exhaust his powers. We see rather the ease of God speaking the word and the creative act taking place. The Hebrew word bara carries the same idea. It's an idea of the absolute effortlessness of the divine creative action. Okay, so that's a first approach to the way of creation. The creation of man. It seems to be the climax of creation, the creation of man. However, I think that the creation of Shabbat, actually the moment that God discontinues his activities of creation, is the actual goal of creation. However, man is certainly the last and most important being that came into being during the work of creation. The creation of man marks certainly one of the two climaxes, if that is proper English, of God's creative work. On the topmost step of the pyramid of beings stands man, and there's nothing between him and God. So there is a unique dignity for God. Psalm 8 says, "Thou hast made him little less than God," or rather, "Thou hast made him little less than the angels." Both are possible. "And dost crown him with glory and honor. Thou hast given him dominion over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under his feet." So little below Elohim can mean a little below God, which is an interesting notion, because that is something we could use in understanding and interpreting the story of the fall. He was created in the image and likeness of God. Now we should be very careful about this. The word image, tselem, is taken to be a carved or hewn statue or copy of something else. So the image, the tselem, man is a copy of God. I would argue that he is a copy of God in the relationship that God has with his creation. And secondly, the word demut means a facsimile. It means something similar. It doesn't say, therefore, that that man is divine. He is a copy, but he is a copy with a specific function. He is to be in the position of God, tselem, and he is supposed to have the characteristics that allow him to function in that position. That is the demut, or the likeness. Okay. Very important, God created man as a sexual being. In Genesis 1, the author made no distinction in time in the creation of man and woman. This suggests that whatever else chapter 2 adds to the creation of woman, we should regard man and woman as equal before God. God's blessing of the human pair included the command, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth." In the chapter 2 account, the creation of woman is separate from that of man by God's creating all forms of animal life. So, a woman is not part of the animal kingdom. Among these, the man found no animal fit for him. Therefore, God made woman from a rib taken from the side of man, and in her man, or rather in her, man found one who was bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh, and he called her woman, Isha. He being an Ish, a male, and she an Isha, which suggests something like either the Isha, the woman, is directed toward man, or the man is directed toward the woman. In the same way, Adamah suggests something like man is directed towards the soil, and the soil is given over to man. That's because of the final hay that we will discuss in our Hebrew classes. Now, in the New Testament, it's made clear that woman is the glory of man, in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 7. Well, if man is the head, she is the crown. A crown to her husband, the crown of the visible creation. The man is refined dust, but the woman was dust double refined, one remove further from the earth. So that's a comment made by Matthew Henry. The account of creation comes to a climax in the author's words, "Therefore a man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh." And this one flesh is like the counterpart of the oneness of God. So this one God created two beings, man and woman, that are supposed to be one, and in that oneness they reflect the oneness of God. Something similar is being said in Ephesians 5, so you might want to take a look at that. We come to the closing words of the first account of creation, Genesis 2, verse 1 to 3, so pause the video and take a look at that. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, and on the seventh day God finished his work which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all his work which he had done in creation." Now, contrary to the usual interpretation, God finished his work on the seventh day, it's actually said God rested on the seventh day also. So, he rested on the seventh day, but he created also on the seventh day. The cessation of creation is the occasion for a blessing, the blessing of the seventh day, and the hallowing of the second day, the sanctification of the seventh day. The setting apart of the seventh day has reference to God, not to man. No reference is made to the bearing of the Sabbath day on man. It is this fact that challenges us to discover, if possible, the meaning of God's resting on the seventh day. The interest in this inquiry becomes all the greater when we observe that there is no closing statement with reference to the seventh day, as in the case of the 6 days. There is no expression like, "and there was evening and there was morning, a seventh day." Now, doesn't mean that in the mind of God the seventh day has not yet closed, that he continues to rest from his creative labor. Or does it suggest that at some future time God will again perform a work of creation? You might say that embedded in these verses is a profound implication that God at some future time will continue his work of creation, or rather that he will start recreating the work of creation. So there is an element of eschatology here, a reference to the future. Now, it certainly is supported by this verse from Isaiah 65, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind." Or the author of Hebrews quotes Psalm 95, verse 11, and says something along these lines: "God has finished his works of creation from the foundation of the world, and that God rested on the seventh day from all his work." But by this he implies that the future rest, implies in Psalm 95, verse 11, will follow a future work of creation. So the seventh day is the rest connected to the 6 days of creation. Isaiah says there will be a new act of creation, new heavens and new earth. So there will be a cessation of that new act of creation, and then again a Sabbath, so that the whole history and future of the world is actually contained in these 2-week periods. But according to his promise, we wait for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells, says 2 Peter 3, verse 13. And in Revelation 21, verse 1, we read, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." So there is a confirmation here from these New Testament authors that there is an eschatological implication in Genesis 2, verse 1 to 3. Our next topic must be the religious aspect of creation, which is a very important one. The work of creation implies something about our spiritual relationship with God. The essence of true religion is, of course, the way it deals with, or is resting on the way he deals with the relationship between God and man. First of all, God created man. So man is subject to God. God has absolute supremacy over his creature. The intimacy of this relationship is heightened all the more because of man's creation as a personal being. Man is able to listen and understand and speak. and God is portrayed as listening and understanding and speaking. Man's subjection to God, however, is a personal choice. It requires an act of free love. As a creature, man is absolutely dependent on God. However, God gave man dominion over all that he had created, yet all things that man has under his care come from God. So this dependence on God is nowhere lifted. The question is, how will man behave? Will he behave with the acceptance of his dependence, or will he strive for some kind of autonomy, or for some kind of quasi-independence? Because he's never fully independent. Okay, secondly, the anthropocentric aspect of God's purpose in creation. Man's creation in the image of God is determining the level of God's dealings with him. The author of Psalm 82 talks about this likeness to God, this demut. I say, you are God's sons of the Most High, all of you. That's a divine aspect of man's nature. There is a character and pattern here of man's approach to God. He can approach God not as an equal, but as someone, as Psalm 8 says, who is just a little bit below the level of Elohim. Secondly, there's another side to this anthropocentric aspect, and that's the basic idea of the unity of the human race. In creation, God did not create races of humanity, but there is only one race of humanity. And so our racist distinctions between human beings are absolutely flawed, are absolutely erroneous and quite dangerous. All mankind are descendants of Adam. All of them, no matter what they look like. So we find the basis here of the terrible fact of universal sinfulness of man. That also means that every so-called race of humanity bears the same responsibility toward God and the same guilt. As Paul writes, therefore as sin came into the world through one man and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all men sinned. That's in Romans 5 verse 12. So no race can be superior to another race. And now I'm using race in this distorted 18th century fashion in which humanity was divided up in several races, which is biologically and theologically nonsense. My third point. The theocentric and anthropocentric aspect are meant to be held together. The human side is that our highest form of self-expression is our worship of God. There it comes together. The highest form of self-expression for man is in the service of God, is in the honoring of God, the worship of God. So there we experience the relationship between man and God